The Diary of Dr. X. 33. The Death of Free Markets, Corporate Concentration, Vertical Integration, and the Illusion of Choice. So, do you actually still believe that you have a choice when you go down to the local market? Well, I'm here to tell you folks that if you do, you have been duped by the combination of the corporate media's usual shell tactics, the corporate person myth, which I talked about before, and a practice which it allows for, namely branding. You see, most people still assume that if a product has a separate name on it, there is a separate and distinct company behind its manufacture and distribution. This is far from the case. In fact, pretty much every major industry on the planet is now dominated by no more than a handful of firms on a global basis. Did you assume there were more than 2 major personal computer manufacturers? Wrong! There's Mac and IBM. The latter licenses its technologies to others to help maintain, you guessed it, the illusion of choice. How many major soft drink companies are there? Once again, 2. Coke and Pepsi. Most of the rest of the apparent variety you see on the store shelves are just brand names owned by one of the 2. And they also bottle most of the store brands you see on the shelves under license with the retailer in question. So what is corporate concentration, you ask? Simple. It's precisely what I just described above. A world in which free markets have been eroded and replaced by a system in which 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 corporate conglomerates control up to 75 to 80% of global trade in their respective industries. That's far better than the Soviets ever achieved under the Russian communist system in terms of percentages. But it's the logical outcome of the CCC system's goal of endless growth, both in terms of absolute production and consumption, and in terms of the size of commercial enterprises, all of which are ecologically destructive, as you know. A world of privately owned central planning, rather than free markets in which choice, which is necessary for freedom, is rapidly evaporating. As for vertical integration, that one is a little more subtle and insidious, but even more destructive of economic and political democracy and ecology. I will return to the example of the destruction of farming and its replacement by agribusiness in order to explain. Agriculture is not only one of the best examples going of how CCCP logic works, but of its consequences on the ground. It is also the most fundamental industry of all, followed closely by the energy sector to the support of human life. Farming, you see, was an entirely decentralized endeavor to begin with. In peasant societies, such as those of medieval Europe or agricultural areas in the Third World in more recent times, it was almost entirely aimed towards household self-sufficiency. The usual surplus was expropriated by the local lord in the typical medieval-style protection racket or state system, but aside from that, decentralization and self-sufficiency were the order of the day at the household level, namely ecological efficiency. Even here in Canada or in the US during the early industrial era, before the replacement of farming by agribusiness, decentralization and self-sufficiency remained the norm. Every farm kept a large garden to provide for much of their own needs. Most kept enough chickens for their own eggs and poultry, as well as pigs and or cattle for their own pork and beef. The cattle also provided their own supply of milk and cream, which could also be processed into butter on site, or even cheese for the industrious. During this period of self-sufficiency and efficiency, processing and supply of agricultural products was also completely decentralized. Every little town had a grain elevator to sell the main surplus product that went to market, namely grains. Milk, eggs, and meat were also collected, processed, and shipped to the market at the local level, no more than a few miles from home, and there were hatcheries to supply new chicks each spring there as well. Sure, the farm machinery was centrally produced, as is necessary for manufactured goods, but the food production and distribution system itself was entirely decentralized. How is it now? Well, I don't have actual statistics, but I would wager that 99% of agribusiness owners don't consume a single ounce of what they produce themselves. Everything just disappears into the market. And they buy their food in the supermarket just like everyone else. And you can bet that the nearest place to sell your production is 50 to 100 miles from home, as mentioned regarding grain terminals above, if not further. The entire system, you see, is now designed to serve the buyers/suppliers, not the producers, because the former have total control. The CCCP system, you see, is geared towards the absolute destruction of self-sufficiency at all levels, and its replacement by its opposite, dependency, in terms of supplying all of the basic necessities of life. People having a choice, after all, is counterproductive from their perspective. This is where vertical integration comes in. Vertical integration is the handmaiden of corporate concentration. You see, when you can't take over any more of your chosen industry due to those oh so few remaining competitors, you just start investing in related industries up or down the supply chain. So you're a grain buyer. Well, let's invest in companies which process grain into flour. Let's invest in industrial bakeries to process the flour into bread and grocery chains to market it. Let's invest in farm machinery manufacturers and fertilizer and pesticide suppliers to provide the inputs. Also, maybe throw in a few corporate farms and even get into supplying loans to agribusinesses so they have to remain loyal to our production stream. That's vertical integration. And it's a reality throughout the CCCP system. There are basically 3 such conglomerates in the agricultural business, the agribusiness sector, globally, as Brian Halvale points out in his article, Where Have All the Farmers Gone? They are ConAgra/DuPont, Cargill/Monsanto, and Novartis/ADM. ConAgra, which is Hallwell's main example, of significant holdings in all of the following areas. 1. Input. Farm machinery, chemicals, fertilizers, seed. 2. Farms owned or under contract. 3. Grain collection, almost half of the global grain trade. 4. Grain milling. 5. Beef, pork, turkey, chicken, and seafood production and processing. And what about the brand names? To quote Hallvale, they also own, and I quote, Wesson Oil, Butterball Turkeys, Swift Premium Meats, Peter Pan Peanut Butter, Healthy Choice Diet Foods, Hunt's Tomato Sauce, and about 75 other name brands. And sure, many of those used to be independent companies. Sorry, think of the past. Just brand names now. As for other industries, ever wonder why fortified blades are now necessary on disposable razors? Ever consider that the 2 big names in the industry might also own iron mining interests and steel mills? Or how the faster razor blades can be disposed of, the better it is for the overall conglomerate's profits? That's vertical integration. Ever notice, if you're Canadian like myself, that Safeway Canada, which itself used to be owned by an American conglomerate operating under over half a dozen brand names in the U.S., was recently bought out by Sobeys. Sobeys is a Canadian competitor of Safeway from Eastern Canada, which has only recently begun to move into the Western Canadian market. They are owned by a holding company which is appropriately called Empire, if you wish to look them up online. As to their expansion, I guess it was quicker to just buy out Safeway, it's as large as you can find in Western Canada anyways, rather than expanding the Sobeys brand. They did maintain the Safeway name, though, and why? You already know. To maintain the illusion of choice, despite the fact that, well, increasingly there is none. And to top that, did you know that there is only a single company that dominates the national pork packing industry here in Canada? If you go to my local Safeway, you will find about 5 brands of bacon on the shelves. One is Maple Leaf, the parent company. Another is Schneider's, whom they bought out and retained as a brand name. They also bought out Burns, but no longer market under that name. They do have close to 10 other brand names they sell if you check their website at mapleleaf.ca. The other 3 brands on the shelves, they belong to Safeway, and you can bet who packed them. Yes. Do you see choice here? Selection? A free market? Sorry, folks. All from the same company. And central planning of this type is the logical outcome of economic growth as a social goal. And the most disconcerting part of all this is the following. All this information is freely available. You can Google the company websites I referred to above and you will find that they are completely transparent about all the brands whether retailers or products which they own. Most people, however, are so brainwashed by the illusion of choice the corporate media is selling them that they have never had occasion to look, and even if they did, wouldn't understand the implications. And why? Because our society no longer teaches them what freedom and democracy truly mean, let alone ecology, which I am trying to teach you. Do you, for example, actually believe that so-called free trade agreements have anything to do with protecting or enhancing free markets, as the CCCP news suggests? Quite the reverse. They are among the most complex regulatory regimes in the history of the human race, with the sole goal of limiting various national governments' abilities to regulate or limit CCCP institutions' activities in any way. After all, as far as they are concerned, nations must be utterly and completely dependent upon them, just as individuals and households are, because that is best for the bottom line. And that, my friends, is the end of not only free markets, but of democracy as well.